right, so I think a bit of an explanation is in order here. Not only for why I chose to dig into this series specifically, but why I decided to do it again. See, recently on a day off, I was messing around with Max Payne 3. I'm not really sure why, but at the time, for some reason, that game had been rattling around in the back of my mind. So there I am, playing a title that I've always had a fairly positive view of. One that, in my mind, was a fun enough, if not flawed experience, locked inside of a cancerous tumor of mid-2000s poorly aged game design trends. Around the 30 or 40 minute mark though, something happened. Something that was almost like being hit by a bolt of lightning. As I navigated this over-the-hill, alcoholic ex-cop through set pieces and firefights, shooting Brazilian gangsters and hitmen full of holes, it struck me. This might be the best third-person shooter I've ever played. Yeah, I know. Trust me, I'm as surprised as you are. And because I often find the creative process of making videos a good way to navigate the workings of my mind and cement a few scattered threads of logic into a fully formed idea, I got to work doing just that, which is precisely when I ran into a problem. See, with any other game, it would have been easy to just touch on its existence within a broader franchise and move on. I mean, do you really need to have played the 5 previous Call of Duty Black Ops games to enjoy the 6? Maybe a hot take, I'm gonna lean towards no. But Max Payne 3 is kinda special. Well, honestly, it's incredibly special. Not only in the way that its audience received it, but in the insanely unique circumstances surrounding its very existence. Because once I buckled down and really started analyzing things, I found that nearly every gameplay mechanic, story beat, and visual reference in this game is the direct result of an iterative design process stretching back more than 20 years. And that's without getting into the whole drama regarding the franchise changing hands at one point. Now, could a regular person talk about the third game in this franchise without needing to spend way too much time analyzing the 2 that came before it? Without a doubt. But can I? Well, I think we all know the answer to that question. And with a series remaster on the way, I really can't think of a better time to look back on the entirety of a video game dynasty that changed pretty much everything. What's up, guys? I'm Jared from Avalanche Reviews. Welcome to the Max Payne full series retrospective.
It started with the death of a woman.
Max, we gotta stop meeting like this.
You can't win this one, Max.
So I guess I'd become what they wanted me to be.
You got sloppy, babe.
It was my fault.
Game over, Max Payne.
Max, dearest of all my friends.
The story of Max Payne's birth doesn't start with a company or even a pitch, but with a tool. A benchmarking tool, to be precise. In May of 1997, a relatively unknown Remedy Entertainment released Final Reality, a program meant to stress test the PC accelerator cards that had become an increasing necessity thanks to gaming's shift towards bigger and better 3D graphics. And in a turn surprising even Remedy, it was a success worthy of recognition, selling more than 5 million units. More important than the monetary returns, though, Final Reality won them a priceless amount of industry attention. The kind of attention that had 3D Realms getting in touch with an offer to produce Remedy's next title. And after the finish upstarts consolidated a series of potential ideas into a single vision, the time came to sculpt the resulting concept into something tangible. They had already decided on a contemporary urban setting and the idea of some sort of a drug war as a backing theme, but the last pillar of what would become Max Payne was the product of 2 major inspirations and, arguably, its most important component. Lead writer on the project, Sam Lake, was a huge fan of the film noir genre, and the rest of the team, like any other red-blooded human being, found themselves in awe of John Woo's library of Hong Kong action movies. So they decided to pool their interest and ask the world a hypothetical question. Hey, so What if we made a game with a gritty gumshoe detective solving crimes while diving through the air in slow motion and firing a gun in each hand? And to be honest, there was enough consistent drama during the development of the game to justify its own standalone video. Up to and including the team spending a butt ton of money to copyright the name Max Heat just before correctly deciding that Max Payne sounded way more cool. But I feel like you guys have the general idea, and so did Remedy. The foundation had been laid, and all that was left was to fill in the blanks with a combination of hard work and, just winging it.
It wasn't about how smart or how good you were. It was chaos and luck. And anyone who thought different was a fool.
Max Payne reached completion in July of 2001, and for a lot of what's going to follow, you'll need to properly put yourself into that time period. It'll probably ease the transition a bit if you get into a whole lot of denim and wear a trucker hat. In terms of video games, we had plenty of third-person titles and a bunch of shooters, but an agreed-upon formula for what made a third-person shooter had yet to really be solidified, which really stands in conflict with the modern-day standard of Resident Evil 4 holding firm as the only blueprint for every game to ever be produced in the genre until the inevitable heat death of the universe. The point is that it can be very easy to overlook the fact that most people will be able to pick up Max Payne for the very first time and within the first few enemy encounters already have a solid understanding of maybe 95% of what's required to be playing it at a high skill level. I mean, the movement, the mechanics, and the shooting, they just sort of exist in this oddly intuitive place that can be easy to not even notice. After all, what are you more likely to be consciously aware of? A smooth, jostle-free plane ride or one that's plagued with turbulence? But I think we're getting pretty deep into praising a bunch of stuff I haven't even really laid out yet, so let's zoom in and get a tad more specific. Outside of being able to move in the 4 cardinal directions, Max also has 3 other skills at his disposal. There's of course jumping, because at the time, if memory serves me, not including awkward platforming in a PC game was punishable by death. But more interestingly, this function had a second variation to it. Holding a direction other than forward and hitting jump activates a dodge roll, and it's a really nifty move that, in my opinion, can't really be used to its fullest effect thanks to a staggering amount of frames after the animation completes that leaves you unable to control Max's actions. Regardless though, it can come in handy depending on your situation. In earnest, most of the time that I used it, I was just trying to pull off some cool stuff. But in a game where that's sort of the point, it's a kind of useful if not flawed entry in the arsenal. I can't rag on it too much though, because if you do happen to find yourself in the same area code as a grenade, a good dodge roll can be the difference between being sent into orbit and merely losing 75 to 80% of your life bar. Oh, and don't you worry, we will certainly be talking about these little bastards later. If we're being honest though, Max Payne's moving and jumping is not what set the gaming world on fire at the time. Realistically, bullet time is what put the asses in the Cheeto-crusted gaming chairs, and once you play this thing, it's going to be very, very easy to understand why it took the industry by storm. You've got yourself 2 options when it comes to slowing down time and filling mobsters with more bullets than blood cells. First, you've got the general activation of bullet time, which at a button press slows down the world around you, which can be a bit of a double-edged blade because your movements get slowed down almost as much as everybody else's. What makes it so dangerous though is the fact that your control over Max's aim remains basically full speed. After that, we have the shot dodge, a separate use of slow-mo that sees your trenchcoat bedecked detective flying through the air in any direction of your choosing, but unlike the dodge roll, allows you to shoot and aim while it's active. In order to get slow motion properly working in a shooting game, Remedy wasn't able to make their guns hit scan weapons. And if that's not a term that you're familiar with, it basically describes a mechanic where the moment you press the fire button, the computer or console checks to see if there's a target behind your aiming reticle, and if there is, the hit is delivered instantaneously. By comparison, every projectile in Max Payne is a visible object that exists in the game world. Each and every round, a real 3D modeled asset that you can watch fly through the air and, most of the time, into your own chest cavity. Which is something I specifically remember being the most insane concept I had ever been faced with at the time. And while this is a massive part of what makes both Bullet Time and Max Payne in general so fun, it does have its issues. Now, to be fair, I would imagine the process of getting something like this to work is one hell of a task, especially when you're at the forefront of it even existing. But still, I'd say Remedy didn't exactly nail the landing on their first try. Because in my opinion, the bullets are way too slow in real time. It kind of makes it seem like in Max Payne's world, a regular person could be shot at and stand a fairly good chance of getting out of the way of the bullet before even hitting a mild jog. During actual gameplay, this can mean needing to lead your targets like a jet pilot, and that can be a little hard to get used to. Once you have acclimated to that problem though, you're still going to have to contend with Max's criminally inaccurate aim. I'm being dead serious. Unless you're shooting the late game Colt Commando, maybe 2 out of every 10 shots are going to come anywhere near your aiming reticle. And when it comes to the Ingrams, you honestly stand a much better chance of hitting the guy standing next to the guy standing next to your target than the target himself. And really, in any other shooter, problems like this could ruin a playthrough, but in Max Payne there are so many competing mechanics that work so well that they end up more as quirks in the game's unique playstyle than honest-to-goodness flaws. And speaking of which, while bullet time and shot dodging are individually incredible tools to have at your disposal, I find that for the most part you're going to get the best results by using them both in tandem, because there's some pretty substantial downsides to each of them. For example, triggering bullet time is great for getting shots off, but because Max is also moving in slow motion, the bullets coming back at him are going to be just as deadly as his. Now, the shot dodge solves this issue by letting Max speedily, in a relative sense, move out of the way of incoming fire, with its counterbalance being that Max is left open and uncontrollable for the lengthy animation of him getting back up off of the floor. So the smart move is going to be to double dip. So maybe you use bullet time to break out of cover and get off some well-aimed shots, and then dive to get out of the way of any incoming retorts while hopefully moving in the remote direction of some more cover. To be honest though, I'm sort of overcomplicating things. These mechanics are here with the main purpose of letting you pull off some of the coolest shit this side of an action movie, and in that sense, they work scarily well. And listen, no one on this channel is going to tell you that you can't have the time of your life blasting away at New York greaseballs in slow motion. But a game that gives the main character what amounts to real-life cheat codes sort of needs to make sure there's an element of balance at play. Something that's going to keep you from steamrolling the game with little to no pushback. And let me assure you, Max Payne has that side of the equation very well taken care of. To put it bluntly, Max Payne can be a Max Payne in the ass sometimes, for a number of reasons, some of them good and some bad. Counterintuitively, on the positive side is the fact that our NYPD protagonist is about as resilient to gunfire, if not less so, than the people he's shooting at. I mean, if I had a dime for every time that I went from totally full life to completely dead in the same micro moment that I heard the gunfire that did it to me, well, I probably wouldn't have to spend all day thinking of metaphors to end sentences with. And almost like a supporting pillar of that not-so-short lifespan is the fact that your limited resource of health-restoring pain pills aren't an instant solution to dying, because once you pop a few, you have to actually wait for them to kick in. Now throw that together with an army of mobster wise guys who seem to sometimes have much better aim than the game's own main character, and you've got yourself a bit of a glass cannon situation. Like, sure, you are able to dish out an absolute landslide of bullet-propelled punishment, but at the same time, you are never, ever more than a few moments from seeing this. And I could definitely understand after hearing that if you found this level of difficulty to serve as a kind of dam holding back the floodwaters of potential fun, but I find the opposite to be true. Max and his enemies sharing the same lethal allergy to lead, the fast-paced encounters and lack of gun accuracy, despite being technical downsides, are a huge part of why every single fight in this game can be overdose levels of enjoyment. And of course, being able to slow down time and react to threats with superhuman feats of acrobatics only adds fuel to that fire, but I'm gonna level with you guys. Every single time I play this game, I find myself spending large sections of a level actually fighting the urge to use Max's time-halting abilities. I really can't put my finger on it, but there is something incredibly satisfying about the real-time combat in this game. Of course, with the aforementioned high level of difficulty, I don't get very many opportunities to just raw dog a gunfight, but I would say the real fun comes in resisting the urge to abuse bullet time. For example, one of the very well-known strategies in the game is to chain bullet time dives together. Not just because it's a good way to deal lots of damage and get out of the way of enemy bullets, but also because Remedy didn't like the idea of wasted shot dodges thanks to an empty weapon. So the game will just magically reload your gun when you hit the button, and with that in mind, you could theoretically continue doing these slow-mo dives until everyone in the room is dead or you completely run out of ammo. That kind of feels like cheating to me though. Of course, I have been known to abuse the strategy, don't get me wrong, but I try to approach every situation with the intention of seeing just how little I can abuse my leg up on the game without getting completely obliterated. I'd say in most scenarios, this plays out as me dealing with the biggest threats using bullet time and then proceeding to a real-time 1v1 with the last guy standing. Or instead, maybe starting the fight at regular speed and then seeing how long I can go without falling back onto my slow-motion get-out-of-jail-free card. Oh, and as a bit of a side note, it's really fun watching these mafia stereotypes accidentally take each other out with friendly fire. I don't have a greater point to make with this or anything, it's just the funniest thing ever, and it'll happen a pretty good amount over the course of the game. Okay, so the overall takeaway here is that Max Payne is so fun at times it feels illegal. I mean, just absolute nuclear blast levels of dopamine. But if you were paying attention, you might remember that a while back I said there were some good and bad aspects to its difficulty. Well, it's time to get into the latter. Starting off with what I would call the two unintentional entries on this list, we have the natural consequences of playing a 24-year-old PC game on a modern computer. See, Max Payne back in its day was intended to have an adaptive difficulty that would in theory raise and lower certain values like bullet time gained from kills, damage taken, and enemy reaction time based on how well you were doing. The idea being that a person who was really good at the game would find round about the same level of challenge as a guy who could barely play it. And in fairness, that is precisely how things worked, again, back in its day. Someone playing the game on a modern PC, though, is going to find that, for whatever reason, player deaths no longer trigger the difficulty to lower. So after a bit of time, everyone's going to be playing Max Payne at the absolute hardest level that it can possibly dish out. And for reasons we're going to get into, that kind of ball torture just isn't necessary if you're looking for a challenge while playing this game. On a similar mechanical level, because some physics calculations are tied to the in-game frame rate, things get a little wonky when running the game above 60 frames per second. The biggest problem being that shot dodge will have Max floating just a few centimeters off of the floor. Outside of that, some of the cutscenes will be messed up, and to a degree it might make the game unfinishable. For all of these issues, I recommend the A Little Closer to Playable patch, which fixes the frame rate thing, includes a registry editor that disables the adaptive difficulty and unlocks all difficulty modes, on top of offering a great widescreen fix that places HUD elements in the correct spots. Trust me when I say you need this patch. I can admit that this last playthrough was the first time I found out about the whole difficulty thing, and it is almost incredible how much more enjoyable this game is when it's not actively trying to kick your teeth down your throat. But moving on to the stuff that the game's developers can actually control, Max Payne is set up in a lot of scenarios to specifically be, there's no better way to say it, as cheap and annoying as humanly possible. Sometimes that comes in the form of enemy placement and reaction times, like this example where I walk through a door and get immediately shot by a bad guy before I'm even physically able to see him. But really though, that's nothing. These enemies are held to the same RNG as you, which means they're capable of missing a shot here or there. The more deviously dangerous threat that Remedy's cooked up for you is something every Max Payne fan will know as the grenade around the corner problem. I truly cannot begin to explain to you how often you're going to take a turn or climb a set of stairs in this game, only to be met by a grenade thrown so consistently every time that I doubt very much there's an actual NPC responsible for tossing it. As you get further and further into this thing, it honestly gets kind of hard not to get the impression that the staff at Remedy were just kind of furious with you at the idea that you'd have the audacity to even play their game. Because these guys have set up traps for you that you'd either need clairvoyance or a previous playthrough under your belt to be able to even react to. And no matter who you are or what kind of a temperament you have, I can guarantee at some point the cheap nature of these moments will get to you. That being said, I think there's a separate line of the gameplay experience running perpendicular to this issue that kind of helps ease the burn a bit. Like most PC games, Max Payne allows you to quick save with the press of a button, which is a damn near essential tool to make use of because without it, each death is going to send you back to the last load screen. However, unlike most PC games, outside of Stalker maybe, the ability to quick save here feels less like a universal design choice and more like something the team took special account of during development. It's sort of hard to explain, but it almost feels like most areas in Max Payne weren't actually meant to be played through in a single uninterrupted session. Instead, you'll naturally find yourself gravitating towards finding a certain spot, quick saving, getting absolutely obliterated, and trying it again until you get a general sense of where each threat is, which one to deal with, in what order, and how to best use the environment. It's like instead of full uninterrupted levels, each enemy encounter and set piece becomes its own little sectioned off chunk that you'll more often than not have to take a few cracks at in order to proceed past. And, sure, maybe everyone who plays this game might just be discovering some unaccounted for strategy, but to me it seems more like Remedy intentionally leaned on the quick save function about as hard as they did bullet time. Because not only will most people find themselves quick saving to ensure that they progress smoothly through a level, but eventually, once you play long enough, you'll start to make a metagame out of it. You'll start quick loading to retry a section, not because you got sent to the game over screen, but because you can do it just a little more stylishly than you did. It's honestly a really interesting phenomenon because it's a nearly universal experience. When you talk to other fans of the series or you watch content on the game, you'll see the same shared strategy of retrying pieces of a level, not out of necessity, but by choice. I mean, outside of the general challenge that Max Payne already offers, players just kind of naturally find themselves gravitating towards a self-imposed sort of challenge, like getting through the next area taking as few hits as possible, or even more likely, in the most stylish way humanly imaginable. Now, if I was feeling especially kind, I might say that this was something Remedy purposefully took account of during the game's development and specifically implemented with the intended goal of players using this method to best experience the game. But to be totally honest with you, I would be way more likely to believe that this was more due to random happenstance than conscious effort. I think the specific decisions that went into Max Payne's creation mixed together with PC gaming's universal quick save feature to organically create an unintended side effect that luckily ended up moving the gameplay needle in the positive direction. And I think it's this unique emerging gameplay strategy that keeps Remedy's very cheap design choices from negatively affecting the game. Because on the simplest level, you're already going to be quick saving and quick loading at every blind corner, so when you do take an unfairly chucked grenade to the dome, at worst, you'll be sent back like 2 minutes into your run. So really, Remedy ended up lucking out here. What would normally be pretty nasty marks against the game were to some degree smoothed over by it enforcing a style of play that lessens their impact on the experience. And you know, at the end of the day, I think this act of stumbling ass backwards into a really good result is a perfect analogy for Max Payne's first appearance on the gameplay end of things. For sure, this was the result of an incredible amount of hard work, and it does need to be said that the innovative ideas that went into this thing are still praiseworthy today. But it seems obvious, at least to me, that Remedy had yet to acquire the development experience to take this collection of individually effective elements and combine them into a polished, well-crafted, unified experience. Now, the resulting video game is without a doubt a major success. I mean, I can't even begin to describe how much fun you can have with Max Payne. But during that process, you are going to have to step over a few sizable cracks in the foundation. A fair number of rough edges might catch your skin, and you might need to change your pace to account for a couple of bumpy pathways. At the end of the day, though, I would say Max Payne firmly defends its status as a gaming milestone. In other words, it more than holds up today. Remedy's industry-changing invention of the bullet time system is, quite ironically, timeless. It's something that developers continue to emulate today, and the vehicle that served as its introduction to the masses remains an example of a perfectly imperfect masterpiece.
End of the road, Payne. Vince Mugnano.
I don't think many would disagree with the idea that Max Payne's gameplay is an almost arcade-like experience. I mean, playing through the game, you could almost imagine the existence of some kind of a high score counter keeping track of cool moves and trick shots in the corner. But without a doubt, it's the story that pulls all of that wild action back down to earth. It's a gritty, dark tale that I think perfectly lives up to the film noir inspirations that led to its creation. And like any other detective story worth its weight in metaphor-driven dialogue, in order to properly cover these events, we're gonna need to start at their climax.
Stand by. 1010. Investigator reported disturbance at Acer Plaza.
10-4 dispatcher. Verify address.
It's Acer Plaza. Repeat. Acer Plaza.
We open up on a blizzard-plagued New York City as police rush to the Acer Tower after a disturbance is reported. And as we'll come to see, calling this situation a disturbance is akin to labeling an atomic explosion as sort of loud. As they arrive on the scene, we get our first glimpse of the titular Max Payne, and he's about to clue us in on the wild series of events that led to him standing atop a skyscraper that could just as easily be made up of the dead bodies he's produced getting here.
I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over.
By contrast, though, 3 years ago Max kind of had it all. A good job, a loving wife, a newborn daughter. I mean, the guy still worked in New York, so there were definitely some improvements that could have been made, but by all means, he was living the American dream.
But dreams have a nasty habit of going bad when you're not looking.
Coming home from work one day, Detective Payne notices that his house has been broken into, and the tag on the wall insists that the people who did it were either high on or connected to Valkyr, a new drug that had recently hit New York like a freight train. Before he gets too far into what would turn out to be a darkly memorable day for him, Max gets a phone call, and when he tells the person on the other line to get a hold of the cops, they make sure to let him know that's not going to be happening.
I'm afraid I cannot help you.
Who is this?
Continuing up the stairs, he catches the auditory evidence of the brutal scene he's about to walk into, and after taking out the 3 psychos responsible for all of this, Max walks in on the corpse of not only his wife, but also his newborn baby. This is some deceptively dark shit, and it probably would have hit me a whole lot harder if the game hadn't have placed exclamation marks above the bodies as if they had just spotted Solid Snake. Almost immediately after this incident, Max transfers to the DEA with the goal of tracking down the origins of the drug that played a hand in the deaths of his loved ones. And flash forward 3 years later, he finds himself undercover in the Punchinello crime family and closer to that goal than he's ever been. Like most things within a 3-mile radius of this guy though, all of that's about to go to hell. While New York receives the first assaults of an incoming record-breaking ice storm, Max heads to Roscoe Street Station to meet up with one of the 2 people on Earth who actually knows that he's an undercover cop. Almost immediately after stepping off the train, he notices the telltale signs of some rotten shit going down, and after coming across a dead body, our leopard print baddie in the leather coat skins his smoke wagon and gets to work. Because if there's 2 things in this world that you can call Max a true expert at, it's mourning the dead and putting holes in people. In the process of fumigating a nice percentage of the city's wise guy population, Max uncovers a bank robbery that he immediately pegs as an attempt at misdirection. While trying to inform his contact Alex about it though, his Rolodex of dead acquaintances gets another entry.
If it's Lapino, it's... Alex?
And with that, we have a few different problems. First, obviously, is the death of his partner Alex, and second is the fact that nobody, including the NYPD, knows that he's law enforcement. So not only is he on the run from the cops, but as we're about to find out, he's also been outed as a plant.
That kind of depends on who's asking. A friend or a junk squad plan. But don't answer. It's one of them, how do you put it, rhetorical questions.
But in a glass half full kind of perspective, now that he's a free agent, Max is able to investigate this whole V thing with his own special approach, and he is able to identify a few names that might lead him to some more info concerning both the drug trade and why it seems like somebody's gunning for him specifically. In the process of investigating the rest of this hotel/mafia forward operating base, Max comes across the diary of a prostitute who's been secretly filming her clients and selling the resulting material on the side. In it, she mentions that she's selling it to somebody she calls a hag, and one of her Johns is a one-eyed Alfred. 2 little details we're going to go ahead and keep in our pocket for later. Before exiting the mobster hideout, Max makes his intentions towards the organization well known.
The word was out. A deadly virus released into the city's corrupt circulatory system. Something wicked this way comes. Max Payne at large.
A move that some might call a little lacking in tactical acumen, but when you're packing an army platoon's worth of firearms under your corny button-up shirt, you can pretty much do anything you want. So off Max goes to the next destination on his to-shoot-up list, a hangout tied to Jack Lapino, one of the higher-ups in the organization. About right as he arrives, though, Max finds out he's not the only one gunning for Lapino's head as he stumbles onto a mobland bombing perpetuated by Vladimir Lem, leader of the Russian arm of New York's rich and diverse criminal landscape. And since there's no reason to let a good distraction go to waste, our vigilante anti-hero proceeds with his airtight strategy of shooting first, second, and third, and then asking a few questions if anyone's left breathing afterwards. And while this is an element that's been present in some form since the start of the game, this section that lets you run around a blocked-off street corner really highlights something that makes Max Payne so interesting, which is the almost comic book tier exaggeration of the vice, crime, and overall moral decay that's often associated with NYC and media. Max's version of the booming megalopolis is one that's mostly populated by smut hustlers, firearm ads, liquor stores, and criminal hideouts, and it's actually really effective at selling this world to you. I mean, it's not exactly ridiculously separated from the real-life New York, but this cartoon level of focus on the shadows cast by the city's unfathomably tall buildings helps ground all the chaos going on. Because in this world, an undercover cop taking out the equivalent of a medium-sized country's population and still staying one step ahead of the police trying to stop him is sort of feasible. It's a place where drugs are more easily obtained than food, and both Italian and Russian mob forces fight openly in the street. In my opinion, it makes for a solid, sort of believable backdrop that the more outlandish elements of the plot can rest on, while making sure not to stretch your suspension of disbelief to the point of breaking. I mean, sure, we are controlling a guy that can slow down the world around him, but in the game's defense, have you ever heard of somebody taking hundreds of painkillers across a 48-hour period and still living? For all we know, that's how you actually get superpowers, and it's been our livers holding us back this entire time. After entering one of Lupino's now bomb-riddled tenement buildings, Max comes across a ringing payphone which, for some unknowable reason, he stops his killing spree to answer. On the other line is a man named Alfred Woden, and while we don't really know who that is yet, we do know he's been keeping an eye on Max, as he's able to warn him that the cops are coming and someone has let them know that they'll find him specifically there. On the plus side, Max, being a cop, is pretty familiar with the usual routine these guys would go through before raiding the place, so he knows he'll have enough time to track Lupino's office. And about 2 or 3 cemeteries worth of corpses later, he does make it to the proverbial crime throne, only instead of the man himself, Max finds Vinny Gognitti, a lower-level capo and originator of probably the best line ever voice acted in a video game. Yeah, so Vinny gets winged in the resulting gunfight and leads Max on a very interesting chase, including some train hopping along the way, but eventually the Angel of Death, aka Max Payne, does catch up with the injured mobster. The resulting interrogation is important for 2 reasons. One, Vinny lets us know that Lupino is at the nightclub Ragnarok, but more importantly, Max comes clean with us, the audience.
There was no glory in this. I hadn't asked for this crap. Trouble had come to me in big dark swarms. The good and the just were like gold dust in the city. I had no illusions. I was not one of them. I was no hero.
He's aware that he's not on some kind of a justifiable holy crusade and that he's not the good guy in this situation. He's just some dude that was in the wrong place at the wrong time, stripping him of any potential path forward but the one that leads to a whole lot of bloodshed, which has basically turned him into a bullet, propelled by a mountain of painkillers and anger, with a set, unalterable course. But getting back to the revenge tour, our next stop is the gothic-themed nightclub Ragnarok, where we'll find both Jack Lupino and his more elite-level goons. Once inside, Max comes across all sorts of evidence concerning the caliber of psycho that he's dealing with. It seems like Lupino's become a sort of melting pot for a slew of alternative religious practices. From demonology and devil worship to witchcraft and Norse mythology, our man's belief system seems to have only one rule: violence and death has to be involved in some tangible way. Which does line up with some of the small bits of info that we've come across so far, like letters written by Vinny warning Punchinello that Lupino's been making blood sacrifices out of the men under his command. After making it to the backstage area, Max finally comes face to face with the psycho in question, and he definitely lives up to the hype.
I've tasted the devil's green blood. It runs in my veins. I've seen beyond the world of skin, the architecture of blood and bow and arrow. Death is coming!
Only all of the wild, often contradicting belief systems that he's gathered together didn't really do much to save him from 2 Ingrams worth of a mag dump. Once the fight is over, Max is understandably thorough with making sure Lupino has gone to one of the many afterlives that he believed in, when out of the blue the story throws a new player at us.
But dead or not, you've got the wrong guy.
It turns out Don Punchinello's wife has a twin who happens to be a hitman, which I'm fairly certain is a gender-neutral job title like actor. Anyways, with these two meeting, the amount of testosterone and cordite in the air is so thick it's almost visible. But the conversation reveals that Max's current frame job came from the top of the Punchinello crime family, and that Mona's here on a personal mission to take out the Don for his wife-beating tendencies. So it seems like both of them have the same goal in mind and decide to work together. Or at least that's what Mona would have us believe.
Nothing personal. Can't risk you going berserk and getting Lisa killed.
And you know, she kinda does have a point. Max is less like a scalpel and more like a sledgehammer. His approach probably did have a higher chance of Mona's sister catching a bullet, so it's a little hard to get mad at her when she slips him a dose of V to keep him out of action while she works. The resulting hallucination sequence has become sort of famous among fans of this game, and honestly, I never really got why. I mean, yeah, the platforming can be kind of awkward in slow motion, but you just take the first left-hand jump and then hop onto the adjacent corner and you're out. It's not really as frustrating as the internet's hyped it up to be. And on a personal note, the weird use of skewed perspective and eerie imagery has always made these sections kinda cool to me. More importantly though, the V-trip allows Max a bit of access to his subconscious memory of the moments that led up to his family being killed. His wife, who had been working at the DA's office at the time, had accidentally received documents about an army project called Valhalla. She had even attempted to tell Max about it, but it didn't ring any alarm bells on either side of the conversation, so both of them seemed to let it slide. The following moments are a mix of drug trip and reality as Max slowly comes to in the process of being beaten with a baseball bat, which he makes the most tactically sound move imaginable by tempting the guy dishing out the beating to see if he could go any harder with it. But in the end, I guess it worked out perfectly because Frankie the Bat Niagara over here ends up getting winded from bashing in Max's brains for so long and heads off to grab a drink. Once he's alone and lucid again, he makes it out of his restraints, and in my opinion, the first part of this level where your only weapon is a bat covered in your own blood is way more annoying than the Valkyr dreams. But with that little speed bump in mind, let's talk about one of the many elements that makes Max Payne's world such an engrossing one. Now, without a doubt, most of the people who watch this channel have heard me talk about my love for believably contemporary settings in video games, especially ones of the urban, big city kind of variety. That being the case, I was already on board with this tale the moment Max stepped off the train at Roscoe Street Station. But Remedy hammered a few extra nails into their rock-solid game world to make sure the atmosphere was extra airtight. One of them being the plethora of in-world media that you can keep up with. Little added bonuses like TV shows that progress as you do in the story, news broadcasts that let you track Max's wave of destruction along with the end times level winter storm assaulting the city, and the absolute slew of advertising and in-universe product placement that you'll come across. They all sort of melt together to form an adhesive patching solution that fills in any gaps in Remedy's already very solid world building. Obviously, they're incredibly small inclusions on their own, but together they play a massive role in Max's legally distinct version of New York coming across as grounded and believably real. And I would say pulling in that same direction are the staggering number of NPC conversations you can listen in on for the brief moments that you're not shooting at or getting shot by the people having them.
Yeah, it's spooky. But also, it's like the failure count is rising.
I wouldn't joke about it if I was you.
Take vampire movies. Why are they always set in LA or Mexico? They can't even get a tan. If I was a bloodsucker, I'd move to the North Pole. Winter's one long night.
I'm not a cold-blooded killer. I'm a nice guy. I love my wife. I have 2 boys I'm very proud of. We just have to make the ends meet. And if that means I have to shoot someone now and then, hey, it's just my job from 9 to 5.
Like I already said, very small pieces in what is a large puzzle, but their placement is in such foundationally important areas that I think the entire thing would fall apart without them. I mean, sure, in a vacuum it may not seem too important to have a running newspaper comic strip in the game, but in Max Payne's little universe, this is shown to be a property that people genuinely engage with. It really has no specific role to play in the story, even symbolically, but it exists in the world, and there are analogs to it in ours. I think that sort of bridges the gap in our minds between fiction and reality. In my opinion, when you're dealing with a universally agreed upon classic like Max Payne, a lot of the time what separates it from one of the well-made and fun but ultimately forgettable titles that sits below it is sometimes these very small, fine details, which luckily is an area that Remedy would continue to excel at for a very long time to come.
Oh, Rico, you're so bad.
I am, ain't I?
Anyway, getting back to the action at hand, Max is able to break his way out of the whole not having any guns predicament, and once he finds his way up to the streets and back inside of the sleazy hotel he already shot full of holes at the start of the game, he overhears one of Punchinello's men dishing that mafia tea. Apparently, Mona's attempt at rescuing your sister went about as well as Max's usual forays do, and she got herself captured at the big man's mansion. So I guess we know exactly where we're headed next, but before that, there's the issue of Max's unfinished business with Frankie the Bat. Now with that sorted, Max heads to Punchinello's mansion, but gets sidelined into a meeting with Vladimir Lem, the guy who's currently fighting a war with the guy we're aiming to kill. So enemy of my enemy and all, the two come to an agreement. Thanks to one of Vlad's generals turning coat to the other side of the conflict, he's lost his supply of imported guns, which is a bad state for an arms dealer to be in. So Max agrees to take care of the guy, and in return he gets his pick of the weaponry housed within the boat that the trader's taking control of. During the conversation, Max dwells on the idea that he can't exactly cast judgment on Vlad for his lifestyle or the deal that he's making because Max is essentially just as bad as him, and he's using just as much as he's being used. The resulting assault on the ship goes honestly pretty well in Max Payne terms, and afterward Vlad lets him know that this might be the beginning of a mutually beneficial relationship for both of them. That being said, this is very much Max's show, and he decides since there aren't any smart moves left to make, he might as well take a shot on a Hail Mary and try to lure the Don out by contacting him directly.
Payne, you're a dead man.
That's what everybody keeps telling me.
This results in Max walking into a scenario that he 100% knows is going to be a trap. And in fairness, the guy doesn't act all indignant when that self-fulfilling prophecy comes true. As Punchinello's restaurant goes up in flames, Max escapes to the streets where his new Russian buddy shows up and offers to drop him off right at the Don's doorstep. Once he gets there, our guy takes this opportunity to confirm that he's no invincible movie hero or noble angel of vengeance, but instead just a very lucky guy whose game plan of shoot so many bullets that one of them has to strike the right target through sheer random chance just so happened to cause the right amount of chaos to prove successful. And speaking of similar situations, once he gets inside the place, Max runs across a few subtle signs that Mona's already walked this path. But after killing his way through the Don's 3 toughest hitmen, Max comes across a body that has a 50-50 shot at either being Mona or her twin sister, creating an image that understandably hits Max right where it hurts. On his way to work some of those emotions out on a few Punchinello mobsters, we get another call from the mysterious Alfred Woden warning him that a helicopter full of guests are showing up for the party. But that's gonna have to be a problem for future Max, because in the next room he'd find just the man he'd been killing to see. And the Don turns out to be as soft as fresh baby shit when he immediately starts admitting that he was just a middleman, that someone higher up on the food chain had initiated everything that led to this moment. And speak of the devil, right as he lets that bit of info loose, a group of suits rush in and plug the leaky Punchinello. And we're gonna go ahead and pretend that I didn't just stand there and die like an idiot on the first shot because I thought this was a cutscene and I had enough time to take my hand off of the keyboard long enough to drink something. So after not going AFK and dealing with the very fashionable hitmen, Max is faced with another army regiment of them just outside the door, led by an older woman, which tracks with what Punchinello said just before getting killed. And this fact would probably be a lot more important to Max if he wasn't currently in the grips of yet another Valkyr trip. This time induced by what was meant to be an overdose of the stuff, which locks him in a hallucination where things get so heavy they bring down the third wall.
You're in a computer game, Max.
The truth was a burning green crack through my brain, weapon statistics hanging in the air glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, endless repetition of the act of shooting, time slowing down to show off my moves, the paranoid feel of someone controlling my every step. I was in a computer game. Funny as hell, it was the most horrible thing I could think of.
He is eventually able to make it out of the OD alive, and my reasoning for why this stuff didn't actually kill him, outside of the whole luck thing, is that Mona dosing him earlier gave him just the slightest bit of resistance to the drug, and maybe this last hit that he took didn't account for a person who had already ridden the Green Dragon before. Either way, our boy is up, and using the last bit of info that he was able to glean just before passing out, he heads towards the Cold Steel Foundry, which I am like 97% positive is the name of a heavy metal venue that my band played when we were on tour in Texas one time. After making it a good way into the facility, the secrets start flowing about as well as the molten steel does. But once he makes his way into the secret army bunker underneath the foundry, we get a much better idea of what's happening. Or more important to Max, what happened. It turns out the document that ended up on Mrs. Payne's desk was referencing Project Valhalla, a government op meant to produce a drug that would make soldiers fight harder and live longer. At some point, though, it was deemed a failure and subsequently canceled, only to be restarted sometime later. And I'll give you 3 guesses who decided to get it up and running again. Of course, evidence of this top-secret operation that required reigniting an even more top-secret operation was never supposed to be in civilian hands, so Max's wife being anywhere near that Valhalla document meant she had to go. The break-in, the murders, and the drug the perpetrators were high on during it were all set in motion by the woman we were just in a room with. And in the same way she was willing to kill an innocent woman to keep this secret, she's got no problems blowing the entire project up to make sure Max doesn't get out of this place with the knowledge contained within. The only thing she didn't take into account, though, is that this is Max, the unkillable gumshoe Payne. I mean, this isn't even the 5th explosion he's been engulfed in the last 24 hours. Our guy truly stands a better chance at dying from liver failure than he does a mushroom cloud.
The pills would hold the pain back for a while.
There is one issue, though. With the detonation of all of his evidence, the trail basically stops cold right there. Max has no more leads at the moment. Or at least he had none until he gets a call from the only other person on Earth that knew that he was an undercover cop. By this point, Max had long figured out that this guy had to have had something to do with Alex's death and Max being framed for it. The situation just couldn't have happened without inside help. But that being said, we've got nothing else to go on at the moment. Outside of this, we're looking at a case that's gone cold. So once again, Max has no choice but to willingly walk right into a trap. And you know, in his defense, BB doesn't do his former pal the disservice of trying to keep up the facade.
Maxie, you have no idea how big this is. It's huge. You have no idea.
Once it's obvious what's going down, the place is flooded with bullet fodder, and Max kills his way to the bottom of the parking garage, taking out BB in a deservingly unceremonious way. And bonus points to anyone who guessed that just as the last mobster fell, Max would get another call from his hidden informant, Alfred Woden. Only this time he's got a lot more to offer than warnings of encroaching SWAT teams. After meeting up, our pen pal Alfred is revealed to be part of what's called the Inner Circle, a secret society of sorts who's tied up in all of this nonsense. And for them, an unconnected entity like Max is the perfect blade to cut them free from Project Valhalla's loose ends. These guys reveal that the woman we're looking for is the head of the Acer Corporation, Nicole Horn, a position that I guess gives her access to some high-level government assets, which explains why she's the one who restarted the whole Valkyr drug project. The Inner Circle is well aware that this woman is only a hair's breadth away from getting everybody who was involved in the project's origins dragged out into the sunlight, so the deal is that if Max can snuff her out, they'll see to it that he faces no criminal charges for it. And I guess it's just sort of insinuated that the deal also goes for the 400 or 500 people he's brutally murdered up to this point. Honestly, it sounds like a pretty good deal, but remember that piece of story I told you to keep in your pocket? Well, here we have a man with one eye named Alfred. Yeah, you know what that means. This is the guy that Candy from the hotel had been filming her encounters with, which makes the hag Nicole Horn. Seems like old Alfred here could care less about Project Valhalla. He's just trying to keep a video of his old wrinkled balls from ending up on the nightly news. And not to pull too quickly away from the sheer scandal of the whole Alfred thing, but just as the deal gets struck, Horn's men swarm the place and put an end to their little club.
It was an impressive floor show, but I decided to leave early anyway. It was only a one-story fall.
So Max gets to what he does best and kills a massive building filled with goons until he makes his way to the security room where he catches a glimpse of Woden, who apparently escaped the attack by playing dead. However, just to make sure he doesn't get any slick ideas about not living up to his end of the bargain, Max makes sure to keep a copy of Alfred's sex tape, kind of like a real-life get-out-of-jail-free card, and potentially on a later date, some interesting viewing material. And with that, Max is off to the Acer building to put an end to this nasty business. And just like you might have imagined, given how every other revenge-fueled operation in this game is gone, every step to the top is going to require leaving behind 4 or 5 corpses. On the way to the company president's office, though, Max is confronted by Mona Sachs, who, as it turns out, has been working for Horn this whole time. Only when the boss gives the kill order, she comes to the conclusion that Max isn't the right kind of target. And as a bit of a side note, keep in mind that this is the face of a person who found the corpse of her badly beaten twin sister earlier that night. Is it just me, or does that context make this sort of a terrifying smile? Potential psychopathic tendencies aside, though, I guess Horn didn't take the whole disobeying a kill order thing too well, because just then her guards rush the room and Mona takes a shot to the head. After said goons had been taken care of, though, the elevator she fell into came back up empty, so there might be a glint of a happy ending hiding beneath all of the death and the carnage here. Speaking of which, Max kills his way to the security room, unlocking access to the lifts that'll take him up to Horn's office. And when he gets there, he does the most Max Payne thing imaginable.
Hacking through Horn's computer would have unearthed files of criminal plans, strategies for world domination, spy helicopter reports, illegal wiretap recordings, internet porno, all of the above. Take your pick. I really didn't care anymore.
Now that he's made it to her literal doorstep, the CEO makes a run for the roof where a helicopter is poised to jet her far out of reach from any renegade vigilantes. But with a few well-placed shots, Max turns what used to be a foolproof escape plan into an eternal resting place. And in the end, things went about as well as you could possibly imagine. Max was in custody for the moment, but looming in the crowd is Alfred Woden, a man with enough power to see to it that he gets every last bit of his promised immunity. So the game closes on the real victor in all of this wearing a half smirk, knowing he had put to rest every single living soul who had any part in the deaths of his family members. All in all, a great way to end things. The story of Max Payne was something that, at least in my mind, was altogether unique at the time. I mean, I'd never seen anyone so perfectly combine the smooth, street-level poetic writing of a film noir with all of the satisfying action of a heavy revenge flick. It was a pairing that had no business mixing as well as it did, and in all honesty, with a lesser writer at the helm, it may not have. Truly, you could take any random line from this game and have a quote worthy of carving into stone. And while this story may be a little light on character interaction, the ones that do get a small amount of screen time have a tip-of-the-iceberg sort of effect. Like the small bits of their personality that you get a glimpse of hints at a staggering amount of depth just waiting to unveil itself. Vinny Gognitti, Vladimir Lem, Alfred Woden, and even Jim Bavora. None of them feel like cardboard cutouts put there for Max to bounce one-liners off of. Honestly, the only underutilized player in this production is, ironically enough, the one who gets the closest to Max.
You're a real angel, Max.
I feel like the introduction of Mona was insanely abrupt and lacking in narrative weight, and the fact that she was the twin sister of Punchinello's wife seemed to have zero purpose in the story, like if you found out Vlad was actually a volunteer firefighter on the side. On top of that, her death didn't really seem to affect Max much at all, despite the fact that it came as a result of her saving his life. I mean, it's sort of ironic, but he was a lot more affected by the death of her twin sister, who is a person he had never met before. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like in the entire story and the whole cast, her role was the only bit of wasted talent. Outside of that tiny complaint, though, what Sam Lake and everybody at Remedy had managed to put together here was nothing short of a timeless classic. That being said, it would be criminal to assume that level of success was solely due to the game's developers.
I'm Jim McCaffrey. I was introduced to Sam through doing the voice of Max Payne. You just don't listen, do you, asshole?
In his very first role as a voice actor, the late James McCaffrey absolutely defined Max Payne as a character. His perfectly pitched, gravelly voice and nearly monotone delivery fit the New York detective like a glove.
Sure, and you can check out my credentials splattered all over this joint.
Truly, I don't think this franchise would have risen to the heights that it did without James being on board for the ride, and the fact that he's gone now, I'm being dead serious, it's genuinely heartbreaking. Rest in power, King.
Birthdays are like regrets. They just keep coming. Each one a new scar that slows you down and drags you closer to your grave. Happy birthday, Max Payne.
But let's not spend too much time on the morose, because in a very fitting way, one of the most unique aspects about Max Payne's story is how obvious it is that Remedy really had fun with it. Even though it is a fairly serious and sometimes grounded tale of death, revenge, and high-level cover-ups, it still makes time for moments of brevity. Whether it's the comic book levels of mafioso dialogue,
Just forget about it. Just forget about it. Hey, just forget about it.
the world-renowned firefight with a pantsless, freshly blown Rico Muerte, or the voice actors just hamming it up in the best way possible.
That kind of depends on who's asking. A friend or a junk squad plan. Don't answer. It's one of them, rhetorical questions.
It's obviously a story that Remedy had a really good time telling, and when something like this is so obvious to the player, it's kind of hard not to get a similar effect through sheer osmosis alone. Plus, Buffy reference.
Excuse me, I have to call everyone I have ever met right now.
With Remedy making their big entrance into the games industry, an impressive GPU-punishing display of graphical know-how, it was well expected that Max Payne would be a good-looking title. But I don't think anyone expected the wildly unique approach they'd use to get there. Starting off with some of the smaller elements, Remedy booked out a trip to New York City to grab pictures of the place, but instead of using them to inspire in-game assets, they were actually put to work as 2D textures in the environment, which creates an effect that I think helped Max Payne age much more gracefully than your average early 2000s era PC game. I mean, even today I could boot this thing up, and despite the static, low-res skybox calling my eyes to it like a road flare, I'm still impressed at how amazing it can look. And for sure, real-life pictures serving as textures paves the way to that kind of an aesthetic, but I think the real star of the show was how almost every inch of this game just radiates atmosphere. A combination of great lighting, stage design, and the eerily isolated, snow-covered streets of the city makes for a place that strikes just the right middle ground between photorealism and stylized fiction. Some of the best moments being the few times you get to scale some tall building and see the nearly evacuated city below you and the endless forest of skyscrapers above. And it certainly doesn't hurt things that there's a neon-lit nightclub in the game with pentagrams on the floor. To be really honest, I'm not sure if motion capture technology was up to snuff back then, but instead of that, most of the animations in Max Payne were hand-traced from real footage. And I think the amazing job they did in this realm puts it a few steps above the kind of quality you could typically expect from titles back in its day. These pre-canned death animations might be a little stilted in nature from a modern lens, but I think they get the intended message across pretty well. The only problem being that they can take so long to trigger in slow motion that most of the time you end up using the enemy's dying screams as a more reliable indicator for when you can stop shooting them. Getting to a favorite subject of mine though, lighting, I think this playthrough was the first time I really noticed how much the game relies on pre-baked light maps, which are the kind that are just sort of drawn onto the background. The biggest source of real-time light casting that I could find comes in the form of the muzzle flash produced by Max's guns. And if we take a closer look at that, it turns out to use a fairly low resolution per vertex effect on the environment. Now, this isn't to insist that these are bad effects or that they look bad, but actually the contrary. It's kind of amazing how great this game looks, despite not taking advantage of the more advanced lighting tricks that game devs of the day had access to. It's a sort of perfect story of ambition meeting optimization. Speaking of which, one of the things I always liked about game design from this era is the skewed sense of scale it often gave. Being able to move really fast was a big part of action games on the PC back then, and thus environments would be made with that in mind, which leads to these really big arenas to explore. And when you combine that together with more realistic looking settings like those found here in Max Payne, you get this sort of subtle, uncanny feeling. Like sure, these are recognizable enough locations in a general sense, but they're scaled up to look more like the sort of stage design that you would see in a play. It's a very cool effect that I've always experienced, but until recently never had the occasion to verbalize, so it's nice to finally get that out there in the world and see how many of you guys feel the same way. And you know, now's probably a good enough time to talk about not what we're looking at right now, but instead how we're looking at it. Expectedly, the original release of Max Payne didn't support 16:9 aspect ratios, so included with the patch that I used to get the game's audio and crashing under control is 13AG's widescreen fix, which is a great little drag and drop utility that allows for proper widescreen along with properly placed heads-up display elements. And as a very cool bonus, the website hosting the patch lets you mouse over an example image of the game showing unpatched versus the fixed version, which is a nice touch for something that you get for free. But outside of the game devs not being able to predict the widespread usage of much higher resolution monitors, Max Payne is, to me, a complete smoke show. Just a wildly beautiful example of how impressive video game visuals can be in the hands of people who really know how to navigate the limitations and resources in front of them. And as if that were a perfectly planned and executed segue, it was those same limitations that led to Max Payne's two most uniquely recognizable visual elements.
My men are still inside.
Do you have any idea why this is called Operation Deadeyes?
Like we already talked about, these guys weren't sure that their 3D gaming know-how would be enough to replace the visuals of the real world, but what we didn't get into was how this applied to more than just the game's 2D textures. See, at the time, 3D video game graphics had essentially usurped 2D and worked their way into the majority seat in terms of display styles. And it wasn't necessarily like they had failed to reach a desirable level of visual fidelity when examined up close. I mean, keep in mind, the developers on the comparably weak PS2 were able to cook up some amazingly believable facial animations in MGS2 in the same year Max Payne was released. Now, I bring this up specifically because it seems like most people who make otherwise really good long-form content on this game, when touching on this subject, seem to think that 3D graphics were just really bad in 2002, but that just provably wasn't the case. It was more an issue that the amount of time and money it would have taken to hit a high-end visual benchmark in this realm just wasn't viable for all but the most well-funded projects the industry had to offer. So Remedy decided that instead of sinking a ton of their budget into the diminishing returns of good-looking facial animations, they would just fall back on the same principle that got their other textures looking so damn good. And thus was born the face that for some reason, every single human being on planet Earth decided all at once looked like Max was constipated. Which, not to be a contrarian, but I never really jumped on board with this idea. A, it's a little weird that anybody would be so familiar with constipation that they could recognize it facially. And B, almost every single time you can see this guy's face, ironically, it looks more like he just took a shit. I mean, to me, at best, this is an example of an exaggerated smirk. And yes, the effect can be less than, well, effective most of the time, but it's one of those things that you just eventually stop seeing. Certainly, it's not the most visually impressive card in Max Payne's deck, but it is one of the reasons so many people remember the game fondly, so if they were shooting for a unique and memorable impact, consider that move a total success. On to what I would say is the much more universally praised aspect of the game. The graphic novel panels that stand in as the majority of the cutscenes are so damn fitting with the overall vibe of Max Payne that it's hard to even imagine a universe where they don't exist inside of it. I mean the concept of a film noir take on a revenge plot set in a blizzard-beset New York City might as well already be a comic book, and for all I know, probably is. So there truly couldn't be a better vehicle that this story could be delivered by. The fact that it's almost immediately obvious Remedy just used people around the office to fill major roles, including the face of Sam Lake as the titular detective and his mom as Nicole Horn, in any other project might tip the scales more towards the negative. Here though, it just feels kinda quaint and, once again, fitting. Like I already touched on in the story section, it's very clear that this was a development process Remedy had fun with. And when some mobster or crooked cop comes across more like one of those examples on the front of a Halloween costume, it just feeds more into that aura of these guys really enjoying themselves. Plus, it's kinda hard to look at these screens and not spend at least a bit of time appreciating how well the layers upon layers of filters do such a good job at mimicking graphic novel-esque artwork. It's honestly a really good example of how well solid execution can fix what might be an otherwise less than effective idea. All of these elements come together to form an overall visual experience that fits into a fairly small niche. Not only is it still impressive to look at today, but also unique enough to stick with you long after you've shut the game down. It's a package that more than makes up for any cracks you might find in its facade, with the amount of times you'll find yourself thinking, damn, that is a very cool way to achieve that effect. You could most certainly find video games both on and off the PC that easily beats Max Payne in an old-fashioned graphics off, but I don't think even 5% of those titles share its position in the overall gaming zeitgeist today. If anything, Max Payne has proved positive that ingenuity and creativity are always going to stand above pure resource dominance. Not just in the visuals department, but every aspect that comes with creating a video game. With Max Payne proving itself to be a major success essentially right out of the gate, and home console hardware finally reaching a level of performance that would allow for near one-to-one PC conversions, the prospect of a console port here was almost unavoidable. Which is great for me because, without exaggeration, one of the most fun things I get to do in these videos is compare differences between multiple releases of the same game. And in Max Payne's case, we have got a hell of a lot to talk about. Starting out with Microsoft's seminal entrance into the market, we have Max Payne's Xbox port, a surprisingly faithful conversion, all things considered. Now, normally I don't go this deep into the process, but this is a fairly unique situation. So Remedy either approached or was approached by Take-Two to handle the porting process for their game, and just in case, like me, you forgot this little factoid, Take-Two is the parent company of Rockstar, which explains the relationship that would develop regarding these two companies when the second game comes out. More importantly though, Take-Two decided to split their work evenly, giving the Xbox version to a subsidiary called Neo Software and the PS2 duties to Rockstar Toronto. And I guess Neo must have really impressed upper management, because not long after completing their work on the Max Payne port, they would be absorbed into Take-Two's mammoth development arm, rebranding them as Rockstar Vienna. And I'm getting this all out of the way up front because it sort of explains how radically different the two console versions of this game ended up being. And if this useless knowledge is going to take up space in my mind, it may as well be in yours as well. Alright, back to business. This version of the game runs at a native 480p, targets 60 frames per second, and with no widescreen support only offers a 4:3 aspect ratio, which is perfectly fine given the general lack of 16:9 TVs at the time. And I have to admit up front, I found this port to be staggeringly playable. I did of course have to climb a bit of a learning curve in terms of controlling Max with two thumbsticks, but once you acclimate past your mouse and keyboard muscle memory and tweak stick sensitivity to your liking, you can be up and running at like 90% efficiency. To help account for the loss of precise mouse aiming, the game offers up a fairly strong auto-aim along with an option that'll magnetize to and track enemies while you move around. And after playing the game both with and without these mechanics, I was able to dial in a nice middle ground approach. I kept the auto-aim on, so my bullets would still fly towards bad guys within a certain range of my aiming reticle, but I turned off the tracking option, so I didn't have to wrestle with it while I was in bullet time so much. Now, an original Xbox controller is definitely not my personal ideal way to play a third-person shooter or really any game, but even with a bit of a handicap in my hands, the game was still amazingly fun to play through. And in a turn I definitely did not expect, the quick save feature found its way into this port, which is kinda wild. I mean, outside of this game, I really can't think of any other console titles that allow the player to quick save at any point like this. Graphically, I'd say we're basically looking at what is damn near the best case scenario in terms of migrating from such a powerful platform to one that's so comparably meager. Like I already mentioned, we've got a 480 line progressive scan image here on Xbox, and honestly, it looks great. Especially when you consider that the most common operating resolution for PC games at the time wasn't all that much higher than 480p anyways. And hey, on the plus side, the exclamation mark doesn't show up, visually ruining the dramatic scene at the start, so that's nice. For some reason, the graphic novel cutscenes use a different font here on Xbox, which I really don't understand. I mean, the best I can figure, maybe those scenes were compiled in some kind of a weird way that required the porting company to redo some stuff, or maybe they used a font that wasn't licensed for other platforms. If you're watching this and you've got a better idea, feel free to share because it's a damn mystery to me. I did find the video output here to be a little dark, but because that's a common problem for me on the platform, I can't really say it's not just specific to my console. But since we have the complaint train started anyways, we may as well up the momentum with what I feel are the 3 things that hold this port back the most. Starting with the least problematic and most understandable, this version of the game slices each level into lots of little chunks with loading screens in between them, which has a slight impact on the flow of things while you're playing. Now, these loading screens aren't the worst I've ever sat through, but they're not exactly fast either. On the plus side though, loading a quick save is almost instantaneous, so things aren't full-on negative with this one. Next up is the fact that there seems to be a weirdly noticeable sensitivity difference in diagonal thumbstick movement. Like I said before, the game took some tweaking in the options to get things feeling right, but once I did that, I noticed that while vertical and horizontal aiming was fine, anything other than the cardinal directions would be way slower by comparison. It's almost like the diagonal movement of the right thumbstick had its own setting that you couldn't change, and it's a pretty vast difference. I mean, check out how fast the camera moves when I tilt the right thumbstick all the way up. Now for comparison, here's a full diagonal tilt. And just for fun, here's both of them together. I will say I was able to sort of account for this oddity once I acclimated to the game's controls, but not having to work around this issue would have been really nice. And the last problem on the list is that 60 frame per second target. You're going to run into slowdown in this port almost constantly, and how far it strays from 60 can vary a lot. Now, I will admit that this didn't seem to negatively affect the way that I played the game very much, but in certain scenes it did feel kinda nasty watching the game slow down as I moved the camera. I only played up to the part where Max interrogates Gognitti, so there might be even more severe examples of frame dropping that I just haven't gotten to yet, but that aside, I would say what's here is more than workable. In fact, it's honestly pretty great. Not perfect, but very close to it given the restraints of the tech that's running the game. Sure, there's more than a few noticeable flaws in full view here, but without a doubt you can have a very, very good time playing some Max Payne on the original Xbox. That being said, it wouldn't be very long at all until we got to see what this port looks like running on a much more powerful machine, and I'm gonna warn you ahead of time, the results are not what you might expect.
I'll be out soon.
Kane in in the butt. Ha ha! Pay to the max.
I remember when the Xbox 360 first launched, one of the best perks that its glossy black competitor had over it was the fact that it was sporting full compatibility with Sony's entire game library. So before giving birth to, statistically speaking, the least reliable console to ever hit the market, they were quick to throw together a software emulator that would run on the new console, allowing classic Xbox titles to be played. And the results were pretty far from great. I can still remember playing the Xbox port of Silent Hill 2 on the 360 and seeing cracks form at the seams of facial animations and getting wild amounts of slowdown. But in Max Payne's case specifically, we're looking at performance that rests far below what you could get on the original Xbox, and it's honestly not even close. Where the original was completely playable with small pockets of noticeable slowdown, the emulated backwards compatibility version of the game is essentially the polar opposite, almost totally unplayable with only the most brief moments of smoothness. Now admittedly, I only played up to the second area of the game, but that's mostly because that's really all I could take. The wildly fluctuating frame rate makes your inputs feel uncomfortably delayed, and reacting to things in-game is almost impossible. Now because this version, like the original, supports quick saving, I'm sure you can make it all the way through it if you really wanted to, but honestly there's way better forms of self-torture. For example, being a YouTuber in 2025. Now in the game's defense, it does offer a much brighter picture and the benefit of HDMI out on the later 360s, although the blurry 2D assets and uneven aliasing tells me that this was scaled to a non-integer value, which if the game ever ran above 40 frames per second might actually cause a buttload of screen shimmer. And to add just a dash of insult to the copious amounts of injury, the OG Xbox version of the game loads significantly faster than the 360. Although, to be fair, this could be due to my 360's disk drive not being the best in the world. Now obviously, I knew before going into this rather obscure port that no one on planet Earth was thinking they'd like to start up a game of Max Payne on their 360. But, you know, the whole software emulation thing and the idea of HD upscaling taking place before the advent of the FrameMeister, it had me really interested. And honestly, I had no idea it was possible to be this disappointed with something I only recently even remembered existed. So don't make my mistake. If you ever get the wild idea that you want to play this game on this console, do yourself a favor. Don't. Hey, you guys know what I just absolutely love? Starting up my Series X for the first time in like a year because I just had to include a port section in my stupid internet video and being greeted with a long-ass update. Then having to dig up my wife's old Hotmail password, grabbing a confirmation code from a different email address, putting in an Xbox disc, and then waiting for another update that will allow me to play a video game from 2002. I'm not trying to be one of those guys, but the reasons why I shouldn't just stick with old PS1 titles are decreasing by the millisecond. Anyway, Microsoft, in a bid to continue doing just above the bare minimum, has kept up its curated approach to backwards compatibility. I've got to be fair though, the effort in the series line of consoles has been commendable. The list of Xbox titles that are supported is anemic at best, but it's a fairly stacked roster with bangers like Hunter the Reckoning, Red Dead Revolver, Time Splitters 2, and of course the Max Payne titles. And I will admit, it is kinda cool being able to insert an original Xbox disc into my modern console and have an expertly upscaled 4K image to go along with my smooth as butter 60 FPS frame rate. I'll go ahead and skip to the point because there's just no getting around it. If you are going to play Max Payne on a console, this is the only way to do it. You get every bit of content that you would with the Xbox original with none of the flaws. And that's not exactly true. It does still suffer from that weird diagonal aiming issue, but like I said before, I think people are going to be able to acclimate to it fairly quickly. And speaking of fast, the load times in this port are really snappy, to the point where the increased load zones don't really take much away from the gameplay flow like they did in the original. Without a doubt, this is the best you're going to get out of a console port of the original Max Payne, but it's not exactly perfect. On the lesser side of things, the 2D assets in the game seem to have a bilinear softening filter applied. which isn't so terrible looking for things like text and the heads-up display, but it kind of mangles the aiming reticle. And that silky smooth frame rate, as awesome as it is, isn't exactly locked either. You're definitely going to feel moments where it dips into the realm of 45 to 50 FPS. Now obviously, it's nowhere as bad as playing the game on the 360, and it still feels amazing even compared to the much better Xbox original, but it is at least a little disappointing that we couldn't have a locked-in perfect 60. Those very small gripes aside though, like I've already said twice, this is about as good as it gets outside of the PC original. So if you can play it here, do it.
Amen. Got him down.
My Beretta stirred nervously under my coat, but the train doors had already shut behind me, and I was in for the ride.
Which is precisely what you cannot say about the PS2 port developed by Rockstar Ontario. Honestly, this version of Max Payne might deserve its own dedicated video, not just because it's significantly worse than its competition, although it definitely is, but also because it's got some really interesting stuff going on in it. But we'll have to get to that in due time. For the moment, this port of the PC original offers up a 480i image with that same 4:3 aspect ratio from the Xbox. And also, just like Microsoft's offering, it aims at a 60 FPS frame rate target, although that last point is probably this version's biggest issue. I'm being very serious when I say that actually playing this game can be incredibly taxing. The frame rate often dips below 30 and can even hit lows of 15 to 20, and believe me, that is bad enough, but the frame pacing is also incredibly unreliable. So not only is the gameplay slowing down, but the game itself is delivering frames with such wild inconsistency that you can't really adjust to the lag from moment to moment, which results in a gameplay experience that easily sits well below any other port of this game. I wouldn't quite say that it's unplayable. I mean, this is Max Payne at the end of the day. You'd have to try really hard to make slow diving through the air and firing 2 guns at a time not enjoyable, but if possible, you should be reaching for any other port of the game if you're trying to get a truly authentic experience. Speaking of inauthenticity, the PS2 version was wild enough to axe the quick save feature, opting instead to lean on the autosaves that take place at load points. And on that note, I did notice there were a few more of these thresholds per level. For example, in the Xbox port, you could play straight through the section where the homeless guy gets you into the laundromat, but on the PS2, this section requires some additional loading. Continuing with the differences, where you can skip the in-engine cutscenes on the Xbox, the PS2 will make you sit through them. But honestly, I'd say all the really interesting stuff is happening on the presentation side of things. The PS2 was always very unique in terms of its internal architecture, which could be a good or a bad thing depending on the situation. If you happen to be a developer who was extremely familiar with Sony's Emotion Engine processor and its frame buffer quirks, you could squeeze some incredible stuff out of this hardware. On the other side of that blade though, if you were looking to port an existing graphical package, things were going to get a little tricky. And you can most definitely see the results of that difficulty right from the start in this game. Looking at the Xbox and PC Originals intro, you could tell that while a pass or two of semi-transparent fog is missing over on Xbox, the water is still made up of the same exact 2D texture, while over on the PS2 it appears to be a 3D mesh instead. Now, maybe this was an example of Rockstar going in and trying to make their conversion a little better than the competition, but I kind of doubt it. Moving on, the light cone coming from the helicopter here also looks like it's been replaced or reworked in some way, and you'll see the same altered lighting effects throughout this version of the game. I think the most noticeable difference for me though is how hard of a beating 2D textures took here on PS2. Not only has there been a weird color shift, but you can also tell these are much lower resolution assets that, if the color banding is any indication, were compressed pretty damn hard. Now this one isn't good or bad, but the scene where Vinny is shooting at Max and running away can now be seen from a different angle, which I thought was weird enough to warrant a mention. To be totally honest, if I had just a little more time with this video, I'd play through both this and the Xbox port to completion to see if there are any other in-engine cutscenes that have differences like this. But continuing with the graphical oddities, I only just now found out that this port has an option for screen blurring and it's on by default. Now, if you do intend to play this version of Max Payne, which again, I don't think you should, but if you do, I cannot recommend strongly enough that you turn it off for both regular gameplay and bullet time. After going back and playing for a bit without these options ticked, I found it to be a much smoother feeling gameplay experience, which makes me wonder why it was included and turned on by default in the first place. In terms of stuff that doesn't really matter but is interesting to talk about, this port is the gift that keeps on giving, as the graphic novel style cutscenes have also seen some very interesting changes. In a move that I would say is significantly better looking than the unpatched PC original and the Xbox port, they got rid of the weird brown framing at the bottom and scaled the art to nearly fill the screen. Oh, and you might have already noticed, but we've also got a completely different font from the Xbox port, which was a completely different font from the PC original, which still has me scratching my head. Like, what the hell was going on with this game and fonts? And continuing in that odd direction, where each panel would normally fade into the scene on every other version of this game, the PS2 port just has the entire sequence visible the whole time. Something that kind of messes with the pacing in my opinion. I mean, the Rico Muerte scene in particular loses a lot of its comedic timing when you could see that he's getting domed the entire time he's talking. And I imagine the same would be true for the more dramatic sequences where something surprising is supposed to happen at the end of the scene. I really can't say why a change like this might show up, because if there was some sort of an issue with acquiring the images from the PC original, the Xbox port wouldn't have had them. And even if compression for some reason required the images to be stored differently, it couldn't have been too hard to make 2D images fade onto a black screen in sections on a PS2. This port is a very, very strange situation. I mean, I want to hate it because of its terrible performance and nasty looking motion blur that the developers were so proud of they turned it on by default, knowing full well that I'd finish most of this video, then accidentally find out it's in the options screen and have to rush to record some footage of it turned off. But honestly, despite the choppy gameplay and more blurry image, I mean, at the end of the day, it is still Max Payne, and I think it's going to take a lot more than that to make a game this great not fun to play. Now, is it ideal? Not even remotely, but it is playable, and the dork in me is so interested in all the little porting differences that I can't help but like it in an underdog sort of way. I still don't recommend that anybody play it, but if you do, you're going to find a very interesting version of this game. So, I don't know, maybe I do recommend it. I mean, I guess if you're really weird and you like weird stuff, it's great. So, yeah, there you go. And last up on the list of ports that A, I'm willing to talk about, and B, aren't crappy GBA titles, we have the PS2 version of Max Payne running on the PS5. Yes, there is a PS4 version, and no, I do not feel like plugging that damn console in for the first time in forever. So we're skipping straight to the current generation to see if a significant leap forward in technology is enough to get this thing running in the way that it should. And in short, no, it's not. But you guys don't come here for short answers, and if you did, I imagine you would have left by the time I included the Xbox 360 as a potential platform to play a game on in 2025. Moving on though, this version of Max Payne gives us, well, just about everything its PS2 forefather did with the exception of the interlaced video output. Looking at this port compared to the Series X version, I'd say it's probably not native 4K, but instead something like the PS4 version's 1080p internally upscaled, which isn't the worst thing in the world by a long shot. It definitely is a bit soft and aliased, but compared to the game that it's built from, I'd say it's an acceptable step forward. Now, the golden question on everyone's mind at the moment is probably, what's the frame rate like? And that's a tough question to answer because I can honestly say it's both much better and kind of worse. I don't exactly know for sure, but it looks to me like instead of leveraging the PS4 or 5's extra resources to boost performance, they instead altered the game to run more smoothly when it is dropping frames, which results in a technically lower frame rate in the same spots that would stress the PS2 version, but instead of bouncing back and forth from 15 all the way to 60, this version will just sit around 30 until 60 is possible again. Now, it is important to note that this isn't always the case, and honestly, I might even be wrong, but this is the best guess I can give for why the objectively more powerful platform can't run the game as well as a PS2. On the plus side, though, if this was a purposeful move, it actually did pay off. Even when this version of the game is running worse than its 6th-gen counterpart, it counterintuitively feels noticeably smoother, which is most certainly due to the more consistent frame rate, but also it seems like there are less frame time spikes in this version, and when they are present, they aren't quite so varied. So it actually does feel like you can adapt to the slower performance here on PS5. Sadly, the sharper, more clear 4K upscale makes all the low-res, overly compressed textures from the PS2 version way more noticeable, but honestly, if you're the kind of person who would notice that sort of stuff, your name's probably Jared and you're making this video right now. So yes, if you have a PS5, you can play a much better version of the PS2 port, but it's not the kind of improvement you might expect given the orders of magnitude better hardware that it's running on. And unlike the Series X backwards compatible port where you can just put in your Xbox disc, you are going to have to rebuy the game if you didn't already own it on PS4. So overall, compared to the PS2 original, this is more of a lateral move, but if you are locked into the Sony ecosystem, this isn't the worst way to do some film noir mafia extermination. And for those of you wondering about the other versions of the game, I think I'm just about tapped out on obscure releases for today, but in the spirit of completion, here's the bullet points. There is a Game Boy Advance quote-unquote port of Max Payne, and really the only reason anyone should ever see it running is to marvel at the fact that the graphic novel cutscenes are present and complete, including the voiceovers.
I woke up in a cold sweat, sick and tired to the bone, lying upon the land puke.
On the negative end, it's a kind of bad, quasi-entertaining isometric shooter that'll probably get old after about 15 minutes and includes a whole 3-track OST. Sad song? Sad song with bongos. And action song, also with bongos. Honestly, I can't say why someone thought this was the appropriate instrument to represent the inner turmoil of a bereaved detective fighting his way to the top of the corporate-backed drug ring that took his family away, but there we go.
Payne? Freaking fed! I knew from day one there was something screwy about you!
The diary belonged to a hooker named Candy Dawn. The read would have made a vice cop blush.
Then we have the Max Payne mobile port, which is essentially the PC original, but on a phone and running in an officially supported widescreen mode. It controls just about as well as any third-person shooter could when using a touchscreen as an interface, and I'd say past the fact that it even exists, one of the most interesting things about this port is that it can still be purchased on the Google Play and Apple App Store for almost nothing. Do I recommend it? No, not really, but if you're in a pinch, $2 or $3 is not a crazy price to pay for your bus or plane ride to go by a little faster. When you round up all of this nonsense and try to turn it into something tangible, the result is this. No matter how you look at it, Max Payne was a bomb dropped on the games industry. It offered up a gameplay style that would for a very long time define its own genre. A visual package that, while far from the best of its day, made a real impact through sheer creativity alone, and maybe most important, an incredibly well-written, unique story. One that sold all of us on a character that shot just as many film-worthy quotes from his mouth as bullets from his double-fisted guns. Overall, a genuine work of art. Or maybe it'd be more accurate to say it was a raw, freshly unearthed diamond. Still dirty, rough around the edges, and unpolished, but the potential that lied within was clear for everyone to see. Make no mistake though, what we covered today wasn't just a video game, but a foundation, a framework. One that would serve as a strong enough surface to hold up what is, in my mind, one of the greatest creations that has and likely will ever grace this medium. I'm glad you guys decided to stop by today, and hopefully I can see you all next time when we cover that very masterpiece. But until then, thank you so much for watching the Max Payne full series retrospective. Alright, thank you guys so much for making it this far into the video. I've had a massive influx of supporters recently, which I could not be more thankful for, but with more supporters comes more questions for the Q&A, so let's get after it. Yeah, absolutely. I've talked about this before, but I'm really into weightlifting. I love skateboarding, and recently I've been really into weight loss. I've gone down from 226 to 214, and I'm aiming for 200, so that's pretty dope. This might be a deep cut, but I'm gonna say Silent Bomber. I think that same fast-paced, frantic formula would be perfect nowadays. So full disclosure, I haven't really messed around with the OSSC Pro, but going off of my experience with the OSSC, it can be a little less compatible with capture cards, and it does require a bit of a learning curve. Where the settings in the RetroTink 5X can be sort of set it and forget it, you don't really need to do too much. With the OSSC, you might have to really get in there and tweak stuff. In a situation where the two are in the same price range, I would personally go with the 5X because its user experience is a bit more, understandable to the layman, and also it's a lot more reliable from a content creation and capture sort of point of view. 何が好きですね。まあ、いろいろな好きものがあるけど、最近運動する一番好き。ダイエット中からたくさんカーディオしている。ごめん、カーディオ日本語でわからない。You know, I'm not really sure, but I will say 100% pre-rendered backgrounds, a contemporary urban-esque setting, and zombies. I'll take literally anything else if it's well made, but that's sort of my trifecta. I'll say I'm probably most excited for Requiem because there's so much that I don't know and I want to figure out. Silent Hill F isn't locking me in from what I've seen so far. I have already played Fatal Frame 2, although I will play the remake, and yeah, Tormented Soul is definitely in a second place on that list. Damn, alright, a tough one. Let's say Cannibal Corpse Frantic Disembowelment, Metallica Master of Puppets, and Deicide's Homage for Satan. Although you could switch around Crowbar's All I Had I Gave for any one of those. I use Audacity to record my voiceovers, and I edit in DaVinci Resolve, and I would recommend both of them. You can get them both for free, and while Audacity is kind of bare bones-ish, although it can work with really great plugins, but Resolve is incredible. I can't recommend it enough. It's incredibly reliable. I mean, it might crash on me 1 to 3 times a year, but more than that, it's really fully featured for something you don't have to pay for. As far as advice for learning Japanese, I would say you gotta speak it. I really didn't understand the language and sentence structure until I started getting into conversations, so try your hardest to find somebody who speaks Japanese and talk with them about things that you like or something within your wheelhouse. Honestly, I don't think it matters much what level you're at, because you can substitute English words or use canonized versions of them if possible, but really just talking and hearing responses, it helps so much. It is pretty scary to jump into, and it's going to be kind of embarrassing when the conversation gets stuck because you don't know something, but it is worth it, I promise. I've always wanted to make a video on the point-and-click adventure game Still Life. That is what got me into the genre, and one day I'm definitely going to cover it. I haven't yet, but I definitely want to. Every year they play this grind fest called Gekiko, and I'm sure one of these days I'm going to catch him. You know, honestly, I'm not a very creative person for the most part. I'm really good at analyzing things and understanding why I enjoy them, but I don't think I could actually create something that someone else would enjoy. You know, there's that saying that those that can't do teach, but in reality, it's those that can't do review stuff that other people have done. Absolutely insane. I love it. Although I will admit that I do miss the previous vocalist who did the opera singing. She had this incredible range and she could scream really well, so it sounded great. I think the new guy that's doing the screams though is much more talented than the previous one, so either way, it's incredible. I love it. A lot of heavy metal questions this time. I'm digging it. Well guys, thank you very much for sticking around, and thanks to all my supporters. I'll see all of you next time. Peace out.